about what Finance Business Partners does. So, Finance Business Partners is a community of finance and accounting professionals who are committed to changing the narrative of the profession. The meet and chat sessions is one of the many activities that we undertake in the community, and these activities are aimed at ensuring that our community members are kept informed and abreast of industry changes. On this month's edition of the meet and chat session, we are having Afolabi Smith on the call, who is an accomplished leader and tax expert. He is a senior manager in the tax services unit of Creston Pedabo. This evening, he would be reviewing the recent changes in the Nigerian fiscal policy space. He will share insights on the impact of these policies that have been created in the past few months, as well as survival strategies for professionals and businesses. During the course of the session, if any question arises, you can use the chat box or pen your questions for the Q&A phase of this session. Also, if you aren't a member of the community yet and you would like to join us, the link to our various platforms would also be shared during the course of the session for interested participants to join our various platforms. Hello, Mr. Emi. Good evening and welcome on board once again.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We are glad to have you and thank you for accepting to speak to us this evening.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. Good evening, everyone. So our conversation this evening, it's about the review of some of the fiscal policies we have here in Nigeria. There's been quite a lot of fiscal monetary policies being churned out by government. And the impact is to, stimulate the economy, make sure that economic activities are well aligned and been impacting on the, an average citizen and on general businesses. And so we'll be looking at quite a lot of things that's from fiscal policies, which is demystifying the concept, the Nigerian policy consideration, fiscal policy consideration. And then we'll look at some of the recent changes that we've had in the fiscal policy space. And then we'll talk a bit about some of the challenges that we're currently facing as a country. You would agree with me that no matter how robust any policy is anywhere in the world, there would be challenges as to why the implementation is difficult or not achieving the aim for which it was set out for. And then from there, we go to the Q&A session, and then we can wrap up from there. So talking about fiscal policy, right? All of these are economic policies. And talking about economic policy, you have fiscal policy and you have economic policy and you have a monetary policy. Now, under fiscal policy is related to income and expenditure, right? As to how a country is meant to finance, some of its operations in terms of the expenditure that it has and its income. So what that means is that by implication, the income, of course, will come from the oil revenue and non-oil revenue, which has to do with tax and every other revenue type. And then when it comes to expenditure is everything that has to do with healthcare, education, funding and infrastructure, investment, and a lot of other things. Bridges, construction, road infrastructures, and all of that. Now, what government does is that every fiscal policy that government churns out is always dependent on where the economy is. That will determine the kind of policy. You would agree with me that there's been quite a lot of fiscal policies being churned out in recent times, right? And fiscal policy is a way of government trying to control spending using two tools, right? Which is either spending or the taxation part of it. And what that means is that under fiscal policy, right, government is intending to say, okay, how can we actually grow the economy? The only way we can actually grow the economy is by bringing in policies that are business friendly, right? Such that at the end of the day, the business environment is not in a penury situation where you have a high level of poverty. So fiscal policy most times is always being churned out so that government can actually, promote a very strong and sustainable growth and reduce poverty, because all of that policy would have a multiplier effect on the economy. right? When an economy is already running on full capacity, for instance, right, it simply means that you may not need much of fiscal economic policies, right, to drive that process. But where government has to finance projects, right, and does not have the funds to, it simply means that government also has to look at a way in using taxation to drive that process. And so ordinarily, every economy has, by the time you consider your income and expenditure, you can either have budget surplus or budget deficit, or a situation where your income aligns with your expenses. You would agree with me that Nigeria currently has an operating deficit, right? Which means that there is a need for government to actually keep, providing policies. It could be fiscal policies, it could be monetary policies that would actually drive that entire process of the economy. And the essence of having all these policies is to make sure that economic activities are their optimal best. Now, one key thing to note when it comes to policy formulation is that even the drafters of these policies are not sure of what the implication of those policies would be. Sometimes is of course looking at global best practices on what is most obtainable or what should work in a sane environment. So what that means is that it will trigger down to the peculiarity of the environment that we have as a country, using Nigeria as a case study. So if you're looking at the economic policy at large, some things are very key in the economic policy. The two tools is the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. Now, the monetary policy is the one that has to do with the interest and the money supply in the economy that government is now trying to, keep increasing MPR and making sure that they reduce the money in circulation by trying to increase interest rate, reduce money supply, and all of that. All of that falls under the monetary policy. Under the fiscal policy, you now talk about the taxes and now talk about government spending. Now, the taxes part of it will now look at what is obtainable in Nigeria contextually, which means that government will find a way in actually controlling the spending, right? And also using taxes either to drive, increase, or decrease economic activity, depending on what we have, obtainable. And you would agree with me that what we have currently running in Nigeria is more like an inflationary situation as we speak currently, which is why you're getting a lot of monetary policies to drive inflation and do all of that. But the fiscal policies are also encouraging businesses and trying to stimulate growth in the economy so that at the end of the day, right, we are not worse than other performing economies in the world or in Africa. Now, under the fiscal policy, these are the key drivers. The income and the expenditure are the key drivers. Because where you now have a situation where you have more income than the expenses, simply means that you have a surplus, right? But where you have a situation where the expenditure is actually greater than the income, it now means that you have a deficit. And how do you finance a budget deficit? It's by actually borrowing, right? And when you borrow, of course, what it means is that your debt profile keeps increasing, but you would have money to actually fund your expenditure and also fund some other miscellaneous activities in your economy. So where you have right, everything that has to do with the revenue, government makes from all sources, be it oil revenue or non-oil revenue. Yes, you would also agree that Nigeria currently, we are more propelled towards, the oil revenue, right? Which has brought, our company to our country to more like to its knees with what we currently have, because we've had a huge reliance on optimality of oil revenue over time, such that even other business areas or other industries that could have as well propelled us or projected us as a very high income generating country has not actually been explored. So what it means is that we have quite a lot of expenditure, we keep driving it, keep borrowing and all of that, which is also the basis for some of the fiscal policies and the monetary policies that you're having to drive the entire process. Now, one key thing about fiscal policy is that when, for instance, fiscal policy is more like the foundation on where every other thing rests, right? So which means that where you have an effective fiscal policy, it simply means that you'll be able to cover for everything that has to do with your national and local activities. Now, the quality and the strength of policy institutions would actually help a country to navigate through economic challenges. Nigeria is currently in a lot of economic challenges, but having these policies in place would actually make you have a productive result as a country, such that at the end of the day, the impact is being mitigated to the barest minimum. There is no policy that can actually eradicate an economic challenge in entirety. It will, of course, address certain things, and that's why you would always see, policies being churned out on a daily basis, right? And you would agree with me that as far back as last 30 years, you've had a lot of huge revenue from oil that have actually been spent. But if you look at Nigeria as a country, what development can you actually put them to, right? So what it means is that all of those revenues have not had a good fiscal policy to drive that process in order for us to have an optimal running economy. And what that does is that it keeps giving a pro-cyclical spending and keeps resulting into higher deficit. We keep on having deficit because we need to borrow to do this. We need to actually look for funds in order to fund the economy, right? And what we have in terms of even the budgetary pattern is that we now have an arrangement where state and local government now have their revenue allocation from FAC, which is a Federal Allocation Committee and Fiscal Committee, right? That does allocation of revenue to state and local government. And at the end of the day, you'd say that all the negative effects that we have is actually just being compounded by the day, which means that it is there to actually address some of the deficiencies that we have in the system. Now, the Nigeria, for instance, the lack of its effective fiscal rules is what is causing the volatility in revenue, right? Because we always have a budget dependent on huge revenue coming from oil revenue, which in actual reality, because of the dwindling fortune that has happened over time, those projections will no longer work, right? There's a need to now look inwards and look at what else can be adopted. And that's why you see policies coming out by the date in order to address some of these shortfalls and create a better environment. Now, other fiscal policies, there are some key considerations, right? When you formulate a fiscal policy, you are in the process of trying to formulate a fiscal policy. Some of those measures are actually projected to solve the short and midterm objective. Some of them are actually to solve the long-term objective, right? When you talk about the short or medium-term objective, you talk about what the impact is on the oil revenue to make sure it cushions for that impact, and some of the transition and implementation issues that we have on some of those policies. In Nigeria today, we have quite a lot of policies that are actually not achieving its aim in terms of the drive. Implementation is a problem because of some of the challenges that we have. When we get to the challenges part of it, we'll talk about some of those issues. But transiting from where we were before and the new policy that we have now is creating a lot of imbalance in public sector, right? Which would also cascade its impact to the private sectors. So what that means is that those policies that are meant to drive the short and medium term objective, right, must actually be evaluated on more like a daily basis, right? And that is why you will have some of the government start out having to check some of the database as to how those data flow, what the impact is, how it turns on the economy. Even though in Nigeria, you and I would agree that it's always difficult to reverse a policy when it's not working, right? Which is part of some of our shortfalls. Having a policy does not mean you have to stick to it. If you implement a fiscal policy that is meant to achieve certain objectives and is not achieving them, there is nothing wrong in rescinding your decision on that policy, modifying it to actually fitting into that situation that you're actually projecting, and do a evaluation again, right? So the short-term objectives and the long-term objectives, which is meant to actually cater for our wealth as a country, right? And the accountability for what Nigeria is worth, is net asset, is debt profile, and all of that, and even government consumption that has to do with spending and government spending in entirety. Now, all the policies we've had have actually, been heavily influenced by oil-driven volatility, right? Impacting both revenue and expenditure, which is why some of our leaders are not actually open-minded in terms of having to look at more policies that can actually serve some of the peculiarities that we have. Now, Nigeria as a country has actually defeated some of the economic principle. Fiscal policy is part of the microeconomic tool, both fiscal policy and the monetary policy. They are part of the microeconomic fiscal tool, right, which government is meant to use to actually stimulate the economy. But where you do not have effective implementation, or where you have certain peculiarities that could actually render those policies ineffective, is going to make it look like those policies are not even existent in the very first place, which is why some of these considerations are very key when government is trying to implement some fiscal policies. Now, if you look at what we have here, we have the trend pattern, the trend analysis, starting from 2008 and the projection into 2029, which is about 5 years to come. Now, do you see that the inflation in Nigeria in 2024, for instance, is actually at the all-time highest that we've ever seen in the history of the economy, right? And what that means is that a lot of purchasing power parity has actually been eroded, right? Things that people could afford before, by virtue of the consistent rise in the inflation and inability for people to have disposable income, right? You now have a situation where things are moving to the rise, and the purchasing power that is actually meant to compensate for affordability of those things is actually being eroded by the day, by virtue of the negative impact of some of these policies that we have. Now, under these policies, you discover that some of the policies that have been churned out are not seeking to achieve the basis for which those policies were being formulated. But the peculiarities that we have as a country are also a responsible factor of why some of those things would work in other countries like the UK or the US and will refuse to work in Nigeria, right? So right now, a lot of these fiscal policies, for instance, we'll still talk about some of the policies that have been implemented this year, the economic stabilization plan, the windfall tax, and a lot of that. We'll talk about that in subsequent slides. So this was being drawn up from the IMF database in terms of what the inflation rate is. And so when you look at the inflation rate, you'd see that compared to where we're coming from, we seem to be in a worse position as an economy currently. And I'm sure the economics and all the policy drafters are also, day by day doing a trial, try and what's it called? A trial approach, which means that they keep on just trying and say, oh, let's see if this would work. Let's see if this would work. And what that means is that it's going to keep giving us a negative trend. Now, this projection is on the probability, on the possibility that some of those policies would actually stimulate an economic growth, such that from 2025, we start seeing that the inflation will start dropping, things will start normalizing, and by 2029, we should be more like, be fairly balanced compared to where we are as of 2024. Now, how does this affect the GDP, right? Across all economic activities, you would see that using discrete criteria of agriculture, industry, and service, you would see that service seems to be taking the higher chunk in terms of distribution of the GDP. This was also picked from the World Bank database, and you see that service is actually measuring on the highest, contributing to that GDP, right? So ordinarily in other countries, right, you would have other things relating to industrial activities or agriculture driving up the majority of that fiscal trend. But what we have is that because of our own peculiarity and heavy reliance over time on just oil revenue, there is no really looking inwards as to how to actually make those fiscal policies achieve the aim for which they were set out for. So looking at this, you would see that majority of these are actually being driven by the economic activities, which means that Nigeria as a country, for instance, we need to actually do more and look at how to actually propel and stimulate economic growth and maintain a balance in the economy. Right now, you would agree with me that with what we have currently in the country, it's difficult for you to even think of starting a new business because of some of the peculiarities and the impact of the harsh business environment at large. Now, in 2023, when we had the new president, there was a setup of a committee, right, called the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform. Now, the government understands that there's a need to actually reframe some of the operational frameworks that we have, fiscal frameworks that we have as a country. And that's why you would see that that committee was actually set up to actually drive the entire process and make sure that the country is better than what it was using the formal fiscal framework. And what that has done is that there's been quite a lot of, policies that actually been churned out. From the VAT is removed on diesel supply and importation on certain commodities in order to make sure that spin-off is being mitigated on the economy. There was also the SPM that had to do with the common ECOWAS, which is a common external tariff, right, which is meant to span from 2022 to 2026 to encourage trade, encourage inter-African, patronage, encourage, stimulate economic growth. And there's also the import prohibition list, which is applicable to trade to some, goods originating from non-ECOWAS member states. And then excise duty was also amended in terms of affecting tobacco and alcoholic beverages in order to actually discourage consumption of those things. And then introduction of the green tax on single-use plastic and some categories of vehicles, right? And also the reduced import duties on certain manufacturing items as long as you are a verifiable manufacturer. Now, these policies we actually churned out to actually address some deficits that we have in certain part of our economy, right? You'd say that some of the people experiencing the major part of the problem or the economic hardship that we have in the country now are the manufacturers, right? Which is why some of these policies are actually meant to actually address some of those deficiencies and to make them more optimal in terms of being able to stay afloat. Manufacturing companies are actually going through a lot right now because of where the economy is. And what that means is that if care is not taken, you would have very little manufacturing companies in the country. You see that even some of these pharmaceutical giants that are producing companies have actually left the shores of the country because everyone is beginning to feel that harsh impact of some of those policies on the economy, which is not seeming to be possible to change anytime soon. Now, you'd see that some of these policies that were churned out in 2023 have had maybe little impact in the economy from that time till now, because you'd see that irrespective of how robust a fiscal policy is, implementation is key, right? Implementation, reevaluation, feedback, amendment, or modification is always a key part of fiscal policy formulation, right? And so if care is not taken, some of these policies will be there looking enticing, but the implementation and how it affects business would actually not fulfill the purpose for which it was set. Now, in the current year that we have, we've had more like two major fiscal policies, ranging from the windfall tax on deposit money banks, right, which is meant to actually address the huge real estate differences that have actually been realized or being deemed to be realized by the banks, right, which is more like an abnormal profit. Now, windfall tax is applicable everywhere, especially when government sees that, oh, there's actually an excess profit in this sector or in this economic activity. They seem to want to tax it so that they can take advantage of that windfall profit that has come to that company. So it is not unusual for us to have windfall, tax as a country. It is just that some of the guidelines that have been set for implementation, right, is sitting on the negative perspective of stakeholders. Imagine you setting a policy and saying, oh, is applicable from from a time that was not planned, that people had already made compliance with their taxes and had business decisions and actually formulated some policies for the business to enable them go into the higher level of activity, and then you come and say, oh, this is going to be retrospectively applied, it's going to go in this manner and all of that, is that to actually tackle, is able to enable government take its own fair share of that windfall profit. But what it does is that it actually creates an uncertainty in the business environment. Because when you have the mentality that, oh, even if this business prospers or has an abnormal profit, which is meant to actually be plowed back into the business for expansion or further diversification into the economy, you would now be scared of, oh, the government could also come up with a policy that would now stand as a barrier for you to be able to take advantage of that abnormal profit, right? Which is what is currently being looked at by the stakeholders, looking at, no, this implementation may not be correct, but then they have an implementation guideline or a compliance guideline from now to December, which means that banks or deposit money banks are still expected to comply. Now, you remember that when we're talking about the fiscal policies, we talked about the fact that sometimes government is trying to reduce tax, is trying to also control its spending, which is what also triggered the amendment that was done on withholding tax, right? The reform that had been done on withholding tax in terms of deduction at source, which was actually released by the Minister for Finance, which is actually meant to reduce some of those taxes that you have, such that you have companies or individuals have more disposable income to be able to cushion that purchasing power parity that had been eroded. We talked about that earlier. So what that would do is that ordinarily is meant to actually give room for companies or taxpayers to actually have more more income to actually do a lot of things, or more disposable income to actually do a lot of things. Now, some of these proposed changes is also, government is also looking at adjusting VAT to 10%, and a lot of policies that are actually ongoing by the Fiscal Commission, right? The Fiscal Policy Commission committee, right, being headed by Taiwo Udele. So what that would do is that some of the harsh impacts that are currently facing businesses would actually be mitigated to the barest minimum. Of course, it will not erode it, but it would be mitigated to the barest minimum. So this fiscal policy is actually meant to encourage more investment, encourage sustainability in the economy, drive economic growth so that businesses are prospering. You have new and innovative ideas on what people could do to take advantage of the country that they operate, taking Nigeria as a case study. Now, for all of these fiscal policies that is actually meant to be driven, we'll now ask ourselves questions. Are we actually making progress or rescinding as a nation? Using my church mind, right, I could tell you that, no, I don't think I should lie. My personal opinion, I don't think we are making progress with a lot of those fiscal policies, right? They seem not to actually be addressing the issues that we have as a country, as businesses, as individuals, because we are still not approaching them in the right manner. Now, using the biblical faith approach, we'll say, oh yes, we're making progress, oh, we're seeing things. I'm here to say it. I don't want to, some people might say, oh, we're making progress. But some of these progresses that are actually being looked at are not the progress for which these policies were actually intended, right? If you do not have an economic environment that is fair to all, it simply means that there is a problem with some of your policies. And the greatest of all of these policies, right, are the administrative bottleneck, right? Now, you would agree that sometimes these policies are always being churned out and government wants it to take impact, with immediate effect. Those kind of things only happens in Nigeria. The expectation is that when you want to churn out a fiscal policy, you give a timeline for adherence, for compliance, such that businesses would have considered all of those fiscal policies and the impact on their businesses, taking cognizance of the positive impact and the negative impact, right? Which will mean that, companies or businesses would be aware that we now have a fiscal policy in this direction. So when they are making economic or business decisions, they are well informed, right? But some of our policies are, it's churned out now, it's actually taking a retrospective kickoff, or is actually taking the next month kickoff without proper timing for studying the business environment and how it affects businesses. You'd notice that earlier in the year we were talking about the EEL, which is the expatriate employment levy, as to how much all of those expatriates would now be levied to pay, right? The company, whichever company employs them, which is, as high as $10,000 per, depending on the cadre and all of that. And what that did was that it was implemented and government expected that, this should kick into effect with immediate effect. Now, what that EEL 6 sought to do was that it sought to look at how do we even build local capacity? How do we make sure that companies that are setting up or businesses setting up in Nigerian environment do not, take over the business environment with expatriates across, the country for even not considering the fact that we have skills locally here that could actually compensate some of those things. So it was meant to actually discourage companies or businesses employing many expatriates, right? And looking inwards to actually look at, okay, can we get this same resource within the country, which was actually intended to address some of the challenges we had with unemployment in the country. But the implementation was too hasty, and you see that stakeholders had concern, implementation was difficult, and then it was actually put at the halt. The same thing with the hasty introduction of the National Cybersecurity Levy. And all of this, right, is hovering around some challenges that we actually have as a country, peculiar to Nigeria, right, and most African countries. Now, dependence on oil revenue. We have a lot of informal sectors, right? Yeah, some of you would agree with me. We have quite a lot of informal sectors that are actually capable of taking the country to the next level of development, right? But it's always not been looked at. It's been the informal sector has been relegated, agriculture has been relegated, some of this manufacturing process or industrialization is being relegated. Everything that is being talked about is oil, 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 oil. And what that does is that it kills the initiative of trying to make sure that some of these fiscal policies aligns with businesses and guarantees a prosperous business environment. Now, as long as you're dependent on just one thing, without looking at diversification into other things that actually help your business or actually also scale down to, growing the GDP of the country, and all of that, it simply means that we are still being myopic in our view, right? And which is part of the problems or challenges that are actually been reducing the impact of these fiscal policies. Some of these fiscal policies are fantastic, right? If implemented and being followed thoroughly with the implementation. But if we do not move away from that mentality of dependence on just oil revenue, we'll still be having the same problem. Now, government is trying to move, from oil revenue to now looking at, how do we tax these people, to the bone? If not for the presidential and fiscal committee that have actually been set up that is looking at some of these tax reforms, government is actually also being aggressive on collecting as much taxes as possible. And so what happens in Nigeria is that sometimes some of these are being focused on without looking at other areas until that source seems to dry up, until it is no longer giving us that expected return, then they look for the next thing. So ordinarily, you should be having as many, you should be having as many policies as possible to drive the entire process that would actually achieve the aim for you to set those policies for. Some of the other challenges that we have is also the high level of corruption in all levels, right? For every economy that you have corruption, you would have little or no growth, right? Because there will always be inefficient allocation of resources. For people that are objective, you would understand that Nigeria as a country does not lack resources. What we lack is right leadership, right? And optimal allocation or optimal allocation of those resources that we have. Because of the high level of corruption, you have a system where some national resources have actually been hijacked by some set of individuals, which could have contributed to the country's growth, right? But because you have a very high level of corruption, it's been hijacked and just been taken by the very few. And all you just see out there is, policy this, policy that, policy this, policy that. Without the backup and necessary commitment to actually see how to drive these policies, right, would keep, rigmaroling around the same thing because there won't be much of a progress that will be made. Now, another challenge that has been identified is the political commitment, right? You'll see that a lot of fiscal policies, right, if it's not being implemented in the right manner, it will still not achieve the aim for which it was set. Now, part of the contribution to this political commitment is the political instability that we have. You have scenarios where A policy had been set by former administration, was meant to actually drive a course, right, and follow through to last level of implementation. But because you have a change in power or you have interests that are not aligning at the political top, it simply means that some of those policies would not achieve the aim. And those are some of the challenges that we have. Because as a country, for instance, you'll find out that this political commitment is meant to actually commit to the idea, the rule of sustainability and continuity, right, in terms of implementation, follow up, the drive, and all of that. And these are some of the key challenges. As long as these challenges are not being addressed, we might not make much of a progress as a country. Now, the other challenge that you would see is the revenue, the low tax revenue. Nigeria does not have a good tax structure. Our tax structure is efficiently poor. I had to use efficiently poor so that I can, use an adjective to qualify the level of, the level of being poor, right? Now, in every other climate or functioning economy, take the UK or the US, for instance, even though you have some tax planning mechanisms within the economy, everybody, for instance, in the United Kingdom, everybody contributes to the tax revenue, irrespective of what you do. The system has been designed such that whatever it is that you do, you still get to pay a very fair share, even a high share of what you earn as individuals, as businesses, and all of that. But in Nigeria, because we lack that optimal structure, you have issues of evasion, you have issues where sometimes clients will tell you, oh, I've never been, audited or investigated by a tax authority, right? And I've been operating in the last 15 years. Ordinarily, those are things we rejoice for here in Nigeria because we're in Nigeria, And when clients say, oh, is it that someone went to report me or someone went to rat me out? Because some companies are not used to, being reviewed to check their level of tax compliance. And what all of that does is that the country will still not have enough funds to actually run the economy. If you're not able to make more money from your country using your resources and your, internal generated revenue, you resort to borrowing. And when you resort to borrowing, you keep having issues on while your debt profile keeps rising, your borrowing costs keep rising. You use a lot of your income to fund your debt, right? Because you're repaying the capital, you're paying the interest over time, right? So the low tax revenue is also part of what is actually affecting some of these policies that we have. If everyone were to have hands on deck, right, with a very high level of accountability from, the government authorities of parastatals, right, we have a very high level of inaccountability or non-accountability in this part of the world, right, which means that even people are not ready to contribute to that pot. So holistically, these are challenges that would always affect the drive of fiscal policy. So no matter how comprehensive or robust, even if you bring economics from all over the world, right, to come draft some fiscal policies in order to drive or stimulate your economy or growth in your economy or stimulate business, if these challenges are not being addressed, we will not make progress, right? We may not rescind, right, but we'll still not make progress. Rather, we might just be stagnant because of the high level of administrative bottlenecks that we currently have. Now, what is currently in discussion is the Economic Stabilization Plan, which is actually being put in place by the Fiscal Committee, Presidential and Fiscal Committee, right? Now, the bill is actually meant to actually amend some income taxes in order to facilitate employment opportunities by giving tax reliefs, to some private sector employers and make sure, if you employ this, you have more, or if you do this, you get this privilege, if you do this, you get this relief. And also to make sure that everyone, by one way or the other, is actually feeling a relief in some way. Now, some of these reforms would also affect the foreign exchange regime, which is actually meant to enhance the regulatory power of the CBN and make sure that we have more liquidity, strengthen the naira, and sustain the rate convergence. Now, under the monetary policy and the economy at large, you would agree with me that some things have been responsible for the very high level of problem that we're currently experiencing, ranging from the forex floating of exchange rates that has been done, negatively impacting business, to subsidy removal, to a lot of other contributing factors. They've actually affected businesses more. So these policies are now coming to sort of mitigate or reduce the impact of some of those policies that have been done over time on businesses. And at the end of the day, it's expected that all of this would also enhance the remittances from government agencies and corporations to the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the federal government. Now, you have some parastatals, government parastatals, that have never paid taxes, do not have audited accounts, are just running, like they're running their personal businesses. So which means that there's no fiscal discipline. We have the policies, but you do not have all participants trying to drive that policy to a very high level of, success, right? If we have all hands on deck, trust me, we have enough policies to actually drive prosperity in the country, but we do not have all hands on deck. Now, part of this economic stabilization plan is also expected to create a scenario where, you suspend taxes on small businesses and vulnerable population, the impact of taxes on individuals or small businesses that are trying to survive or trying to actually spring up in this harsh business environment. It's looking at how to actually make it easier for them. And, also talking about the additional funding for the student loan and all of that. Now, amidst all of this, we have problems, right? We have fiscal policies, we have monetary policies, and some of these policies are actually, crippling the fortune of businesses and the Nigerians at large. You see, for instance, that every time the CBN is adjusting the MPR just so that under the monetary policies, just so that they say, oh, they want to mop up the money, the circulation, they actually want to reduce inflation and all of that. But guess what? Those things are furthering impoverishing companies, impoverishing businesses, impoverishing individuals, because it's creating more burden on Nigerian businesses and individuals. So the impact is that the banks will have more money. Yes, will have more money to actually do certain things because of the impact of all of those MPR adjustments. But the businesses that are actually meant to drive the economy would actually be losing more, right? And how do we now address all of this? Now, if we diversify our revenue sources, right, we would be in a better place to actually make our economy function better. Exploring the non-oil revenue, it doesn't have to be oil. There are a lot of businesses in the informal sector that are making wave, the information technology, quite a lot of environments that could actually stimulate the growth of the economy, but they are not always being looked at. Now, some of these recommendations is also looking at improving tax collection, some of the loopholes that you have. Some of my professional colleagues in tax would say that a lot of loopholes that we've rest on over time. By the day, as you have Finance Act, Finance Bill, Finance Act, there's always a blockage of some of them. Oh, this is deleted, this is deleted, this is deleted. Because government is also reducing some of those loopholes to make sure that, okay, more money is coming to the coffers of the government. But it goes beyond more money coming in. How about managing the expenditure? How about utilization of those monies? How about accountability to the citizenry, right? All of those things have its major impact. Now, some of the recommendations that have also come in, or that could also, be a way forward to drive all these fiscal policies, is to encourage investment in other areas: agriculture, manufacturing, information technology advancement, and all of that. All of these are not rocket science. They are not difficult. Well, so you have an environment where you have people coming up with business ideas because of how the policies of their countries have been formulated. Some of this IT software, the Facebook, the Mac, the Elon Musk, the business entrepreneurs and all of that, they are all springing up by the day by virtue of investing in businesses that people have not thought possible, or people have not actually explored. So if we do not explore and having some of those expansion in terms of thoughts, the ideas, the concentration, we may not be there. Trust me, businesses even have more problems on their hands in this country right now than for the MD to sit down and say, you know what, I want us to build things, or businesses like Elon Musk is building. Baba, there are several problems on your hand. You can't be talking about the ones that you have. It's still affecting your business, right? Because you do not have policies that actually help your business to actually grow. So then your initiative is actually not looking at how do we even, expand into other sectors. So government and, the entire businesses also have to look at how do we actually invest in these non-oil sectors, and also have to prioritize in infrastructure spending, right? Which means that if we invest in infrastructure, we're able to create jobs, we're able to boost the economy. And then for every fiscal rules that we have, we need to establish clear rules for budgeting and spending to promote long-term sustainability. Because some of these fiscal rules, they are just there, they are not being implemented, right? Which means that we are not even being able to control the spending, right? Such that the expenditure that we are not able to control, right, is also still creating a problem that is driving the inefficiency of these policies that are actually being drawn. On the wrap of this, I would like to wrap up by saying thank you. We can go to maybe a minute discussion, or if you have concerns or questions or contributions, then we can have them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the amazing insights you've shared thus far. So while the participants of the session are wrapping up their heads around certain questions that they may have, I have some questions that I would like to ask. So talking about fiscal policies, based on what you mentioned during the course of your presentation, you told us that we have the tax aspect and we also have the government expenditure aspect. But looking at what's obtainable in Nigeria, it's more or less looking like the government is focusing more on the taxation aspect, in the sense that they are all about what they can get from businesses and individuals, and not even considering how to reduce the government expenditure. The government expenditure keeps skyrocketing year in, year out, budget deficit and all of those things. And at the end of the day, when we have discussions of this nature, what the result would still be at the end of the day is the government wants to increase VAT to 10%, the government wants to introduce certain taxes. At the end of the day, it's tax, 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 tax. Do you think this approach would actually, make us better in another decade?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So, your concern is spot on. I've seen a lot of cartoons that actually been drawn such that it shows government, flexing and balling, right, with his big tummy on probably, a cart or in a car or somewhere, and he's actually being pushed by, the skinny, citizens or the skinny businesses trying to push it. And that also has brought us to the level of problem and decadence that we have in the country. In other climes, right, where you have all these macroeconomic tools to actually drive the economy, it should run pari passu. If we are actually using a fiscal policy on taxation, I should also be seeing the same fiscal policy on government spending and some of this reckless spending that we have in the country. But trust me, Nigeria or Africa is a peculiar environment. For everything that the advanced countries do, we do them upside down because of our level of selfishness. With what we're currently operating, if, like you rightly said, between now and the next decade, if the government does not actually also watch its spending, we may never leave this deficit situation. Because trust me, go and check the budget that we have as a country. You'll see that majority of our problem, right, or majority of the issues that we carry as a country is coming from debt servicing and then running costs of government, particularly government officials. You would have in other clients where people say, oh, you know what, let's slash the salary by 50%. Oh, let's reduce this cost. But the government in Nigeria is so peculiar that I personally haven't heard on anything they've cut down on. Rather, it's been increase in this. Oh, the president wants to buy this. Oh, they need to buy this. Oh, the vice president's house needs to be, renovated for 15 billion. I don't want to get too emotional. It's annoying, right? It will not take us anywhere as a country, but that is where we are. And how are we going to deal with that until we live a life of selflessness? As leaders, as followers, we'll keep meeting ourselves in this same scenario. It's difficult to actually address this issue because of the high level of corruption that you have in a country. you have a lot of participants, industrial participants in this country that can actually speak and drive a change in that entire process so that government is able to amend all of those. But as long as they also have a stake to lose, nobody wants to tackle the government. For the citizens to actually tackle the government, then, oh, your protest is now going to be seen as treasoning, and a lot of, it's it is what it is. Where we are in, the only way out of it is actually to imbibe a life of selflessness and having the common good, not like utilitarianism, having the common good of the country at heart. It is only then that we can actually drive or stimulate growth in the economy. What we are driving currently, we might just probably keep struggling for the next decade. My opinion. I stand to be corrected. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that one. Then the next question is, don't you think that the fiscal policies that the present administration continues to roll out are short-sighted, in the sense that they don't seem to consider what could possibly happen in another 10, 20 years? So what we are just after presently is just about how to correct inflation at the moment, how
Yeah.
to just get back on track. Do you think also that this is also a good motive from this administration?
Well, as much as this is more like an informative session, I think it's also a session where we need to tell ourselves the truth, right? We are actually in a deep mess, right? As a country, we're actually in a deep mess. You see that a lot of policies are coming back to back to back to back to back. I agree with the person who made that comment. Some of these policies lack a futuristic view. They are just looking at, oh, what could probably solve our problem for now, without looking at how would this thing affect the economy in 6 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. What they seek to do is actually churn out policies to see, oh, can this actually solve it? You remember that I mentioned when I was starting the class, when these policies are being set out, it is expected that, oh, they should work, right? But it's not a guarantee that they would work. And so when we keep on churning out policies, right, in the manner that we're currently doing, at some point it's going to cripple a lot of activities, because it will only solve the short-term impact. So if you solve the short-term impact, in 2 years' time, what happens? We're back to square one. So unfortunately, even from the drafters of these policies and some of the intelligent people that have come together to put these policies together, trust me, some of those policies are well thought out. Some of them. Some of them are also hasty to say, well, how do we quickly push on this? Because they understand the fact that Nigerians, once we get some bit of soot or relief, we forget all our agony. The way they bring Big Brother, to distract us for a while, bring Premiership to distract us for a while. We've always been like that, right? Short-term measures are always being put in place to occupy the mind of, people that can actually challenge the status quo. And until we move away from that era, we'll just keep rigmaroling on the same circle. So in my opinion, right, some of these policies, the way they are churning them out, some of them are trial and error. So which means that majority of those policies have actually failed, in my own assessment. But government is not able to say, you know what, we were wrong with this policy, right? So they are just looking at, so how do we actually reduce the impact? How do we increase the impact? So it's creating a lot of complexity in the business environment. So we can only be hopeful. We can only be hopeful that these policies being churned out on a daily basis would actually be taken advantage of by some businesses, in some of them, not on the ones that have the increased cost, would actually be taken advantage of, so that it can actually turn around the fortune of businesses or the economic situation of the country. But it is what it is. The person is spot on, and I have the same fear, but we are where we are. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that one. Then someone is asking in the chat box what your opinion is on the new withholding tax regulation. Is it to be implemented? The person is saying some companies have already started implementing the new regulation, others are still implementing the old regulation. So the person is basically asking what's the way to go.
Okay, I'll tell you the way to go on two schools of thought, as a practitioner and as a rational Nigerian. If you have, ordinarily, even when you have policy document being released by the minister or ministers that have been empowered by the provisions of the tax provision of the Tax Act, right, to actually make modification or do this or do that. Ordinarily, no matter how robust a policy document is, until it is being gazetted, it is not deemed valid within the ambit of the law, because you will always need to have a gazette. A gazette is the federal government of Nigeria's communication giving effect to that amendment or giving effect to that provision. If it has not been gazetted, it simply means that you should not implement it, right? Looking at the ambit of the law. But looking at it from a rational perspective, tell me why a country should release a document that will create complexity for businesses. If you had not made up your mind to actually have it gazetted, why was there a need to put an implementation date on the policy document that you have? As a rational business owner or a Nigerian, I could also rest on that document, right, to make business decisions. And I'll tell you, realistically, some of the clients that I have said, I've even, advising that, no, you need to wait for the gazette. Some businesses have said, okay, I'm not going to wait for any gazette. This policy document is okay enough for adoption. The federal minister has signed off and said implementation should start in July. I do not see any reason why I should wait until any gazette. Either ways, when the gazette would come, it should carry that implementation date. Like I mentioned earlier, we're always doing a retrospective adjustment. Ordinarily, when the gazette comes out, it should align with the implementation date on that policy document released by the minister. But if it does not, there would be a need for a judicial wade-in, because you have the tax authority saying, "Oga, who gave you the right to actually start implementation? Can you show me the gazette your business relied on?" They will now say, "Oh, I didn't see any gazette, but I have the federal minister's policy documentation." And then you'll be asked the question, does that make it a law? Anybody can put anything on the letter N. It doesn't make it a law. So I would like to speak on those perspectives as a national person and based on the ambit of the law. I don't know if that answered.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. So we have Abubakar Abdulmalik's hands up. So you can unmute your mic and ask your question if you have any.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Thank you, presenter, for this wonderful presentation. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear.
Okay. Actually, your presentation is a kind of wake-up call. And I want to say something regarding these policies. I'm a tax administrator of almost 12 years administering tax in Nigeria. And what I can tell you is, as you said, most of the policies we are doing on tax are just like trial and error. If government will actually focus on the actual ones we are having, not even increasing the tax rates, our tax revenue will grow significantly, just because most of the businesses now that we are exempting from paying tax, like saying 25 million and below, should not pay tax, VAT, CIT, or even their withholding tax rate should be 2%. Most of them are not even actually declaring their turnovers. I can assure you, I had a discussion with one of the shop owners in a local environment. He was telling me that on average, he do sales of at least 500,000 daily. That's 3.5 million in a week, in a month, or in a week, sure. So you can look at how much will he be able to make in a month, multiply by 12. How much will that turn out to be as a turnover? And we are saying, okay, those people are exempted from tax. I think government need to put policies in place, like even to train business owners. Like government can come up with incentives. Train the business owners on record keeping. Let them keep records. Let them encourage them on this cashless policy. Let their money be through POAs, through bank transactions that you can be able to track. Come up with incentives. Okay, any company or any business that is doing a business in Nigeria and has a sales of so, we are going to give him a free interest-free loan of so to be paid in so years. that will give them, like, some will even be telling you lies. They don't have that turnover. They'll come up and say, okay, our turnover is up to so.
Yeah.
That is an avenue for government to tax. You understand? So the policies, as you rightly said, we are just doing trial and error. We want to copy foreign countries that their economy is already developed and they have enabling environment for the businesses to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in our cases now, we are saying, okay, like you said, reduction in increasing the NPR. It's when you have a working economy that you
Yeah.
increase NPR that will let foreign investors to come in and invest their money so that they can get back their interest income.
Right.
But your economy is not even working. You have challenges of insecurity. You don't have power, energy. You have power, energy problem. You don't have effective regulatory talks. How can you expect foreign direct investment to come and invest in your country? So actually, this kind of presentations, I enjoy it simply because I can see it is the young people that occupied the fora. So with this kind of orientation and what have you, one day maybe if we are able to, the unfortunate thing is you can see youth occupying positions, but they will turn out to be like our grandfathers. Yes, that is it. You can
Absolutely.
see. Yes, so at least we need mind reorientation. We
Right.
as youth that are upbringing, we should try and think of how we can better this country. It is for our children. Now imagine the way we are living now, the country we are in. Think of our children to live this kind of life in the next 30 years.
Mm.
So it's only when we have this thinking and when we have this kind of mindset that things may change in the near future. And as you said, they don't even have, okay, mid-term or short-term policies. Okay, in the next 10 years, we are expecting this to work out. They don't even have. They are just trying. Okay, today we try this, it's not working. Tomorrow they are changing.
True.
So I'm very sorry. Let me not take much of our time. And I am praying that I just put in the chat how we get this kind of presentations, at least even just for us to read and maybe share with friends of like minds. So I don't know how we can do that to get this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abubakar. You said quite a lot of things. Our problem is not it's not small, right? We have quite a lot of complexity. I agree with you. Imagine the kind of businesses that run. For instance,
Hello.
in the UK, everything you pay for are digitally responded to. You swipe your card, you use your card. This goes in within the system.
Okay.
And so you're even able to monitor. But when you have even citizens that are actually not willing, it further creates problem. Now, how do we address that? Like the last speaker said, reorientation. Everyone needs to be reorientated on our drive or our goal as citizens or as business owners in this economy. Everyone's mind is flooded up because of the business environment that we are in. Like you rightly said, we've been having instances where we said the young people should get into power, the young people should do this. Trust me, the young people that we've seen that have been given small power, they've done miracle and mighty things that even their predecessors have not done. And they were the young people that were expected to actually change the narrative. So it boils down to everyone having a change of mind, a reorientation of actually what is the drive? What do we seek to achieve? What do we want to achieve? How do we create a safer country for our children in the next subsequent years? Not everyone would relocate. Does it mean that if you remain in the country, we are heading towards a doomsday eventually? No, it shouldn't be. And it's because we are still not giving an orientation to everybody on what the need is, right? You have instances where even for whistleblowers that blow whistles and make a declaration or an exposure of something, they go back to be hunted for, right? By virtue of the insecurity in the system. It's a bit complex, right? This class is not comprehensive enough to talk about and dissect some of these things. But like last speaker rightly said, some of these policies are not even needed. We just need to build on what we had, build a database with what we have, make it a bit holistic and comprehensive, and then we'll be fine. But again, until we get to that level, we can only hope and pray as usual. Thank you.
All right. So, Rilwan Usman, you can ask your question or make your contribution now.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, we
Yes, we
can hear
can.
you. Please go ahead.
Okay, uh, Mr. Adeyemi, thank you very much for the insightful section. At least I have one or two takeaway from the section. Thank you very much. So I just have a bit of contribution in terms of the withholding tax regulation and the aspect of where you made mention of any law being gazetted. Yeah, I think the government they're actually getting it wrong based on what just as if they are the ones violating the law at this point. Because what I'm trying to say is that just as you have rightly said, they are supposed to gazette any new law before it would be probably be effective. Now, looking at their law, which is the NTP, the National Tax Policy, where we have the chapter 3 that speaks about the responsibility of stakeholders. I think the government also form part of the stakeholders. And on that aspect, on that in that chapter rather, they specify it there that for any law to be effective, government have to give 3 to 6 months
Yeah.
to yeah, they have to give 3 to 6 months. But I don't know why at a point in time they will just release a law and maybe many tax law, and at the end of the day, they just want it to be effective. Maybe they like using it first of this month, first of next month. Maybe they usually target first of every month to see how they will which we in Nigeria, at the end of the day, people will start panicking. Why is this coming in, or maybe what is happening? Now, for the withholding tax, yeah, I know there have been so many deliberations on it as well, right? What we normally tell people at a point is based on the advice or maybe based on some kind of conversation we've had with some professional. If, for instance, somebody is deducting 5% from me now, and maybe at a point, because due to the changes, it's now going to be 2%. It now depends on the fact that okay, instead of I'm paying higher, if I'm using the old rate, it will be that okay, I'm paying higher now, then later on to pay my CIT will not be much again. But
Yeah.
if they're deducting 2% now, okay, maybe at the end of it, I'll end up paying the balance of the CIT as a higher amount in terms of when I also maybe offset it with my CIT.
Mhm.
So it now depends on the cash flow problems to a company to know that okay, are we going to tell our vendor, are we going to start telling them to be deducting 2% so that they will be receiving maybe part of that amount instead of it to go and be waiting for us? At least we should have that money to do other things. So I think that is just a bit of the clarification I needed to just also chip in from my own. And thank you so much for the section, and also many thanks to the finance business partner for this section as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Everyone. Thank you.
Okay, so Christopher, if you're on the call, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Good evening.
Okay, yeah, I want to say thumbs up and well done to the presenter. You've really said a whole lot of things and a wider breadth of these sections and presentation, as well as the various contributors and then those who have made relevant inquiries. And why I was asking my question, I hear Abubakar echoing so much and most of the questions I want to ask. Yeah. So in light of the question Abubakar raised, which actually is taking a cue from my question. So it's like my question. Like rightly said, the presenter, like in the UK, where you have the system is more or less a cashless economy, where they run cashless economy with some few pocket of businesses perhaps that does cash, like maybe the likes of the Baby Saloon and all of that.
Right.
Yeah. And where the government is even pushing forward that all such businesses, Baby Saloon, should go cashless because they have come to realize that when you do cash at hand economy, when you run an economy based on cash, it has a triple effect, such as encouraging terrorism. You lost the track So
Ah,
many things goes, it encourages so many things that are not really good for the economy
oh,
and all of that. So now I hear Abubakar was talking about businesses who have severally tried to I think one of the contributors who have said that some businesses try to deliberately beat down their turnover. They approach you, beat down their turnover. When I was in practice some years ago, I have had clients come to me that, oh, we have this letter from tax authorities for audit and all of that. What do we do? Then you see us running scatter in order to reduce and beat all of those turnover because of the tax liabilities. And then we'll start going to negotiation with the tax authority in order to reduce our tax liability. So my question in all of this, having tried to give a context, is how do we ensure and narrow down? How do we narrow down and ensure that truly smaller SMEs, small and medium scale businesses, are the ones actually benefiting from this 25 million benchmark that the tax and the government is saying? So how do we ensure that? Because now you're going to see most companies coming up falsifying records just to ensure that they stay within that minimum threshold. So how do we ensure this is in place? Thank you.
okay. Yeah, I understand your concern. I've even had conversations with some investors that actually want to, open like 20 different companies, right? Their intention is actually to have like maybe like a 500 million revenue, but because they also do not want to be subjected to tax, they want to enjoy that exemption. You rather split the revenues into all of those 20 companies, such that by the time you get to 24 million, you do not transact with that bank account again. Then you move to the other. So 25, 25, 25, 25, 25, 25. So that at the end of the day, you are able to recognize, able to still see your 500 million without being, distorted for tax. Again, it goes down to the mentality, right? The mentality of an average Nigerian is tax evasion. And how did we get here? Except you and I do not want to tell ourselves the truth. There's a lot of hardship in the country. Even before now, you have scenarios where you do not gain anything for paying taxes, right? Some companies do not see any need to pay any form of tax for whatever reason, because they feel that everything is actually being provided for by themselves. Even accessing a loan from the bank is the same 24, 27% that every other person would. Like Mr. Abaka mentioned earlier, imagine if we had a scenario where government gives businesses loans to say, oh, you know what, we need you to expand, take this 10 million or take this 5 million or take this 25 million. Yes, they may be doing a couple of few, right? But it simply means that businesses are not getting advantage of that impact, right? So which means that until people get advantage and see, even on the state level, some of us pay our payees 100%. But what do I gain from government? It doesn't change the fact that it's a civic responsibility. It has to be adhered to. But in my heart of hearts, right, I do not think I do need to pay that because I'm not benefiting in any way from it. Say, for instance, in countries where you have good transportation, you have light, the road is good, electricity, everything is balanced. You want to buy a car, 2024, you can just go to the bank, pay something small and get it. You want to buy a house, you can just make 10% equity and then start paying. But in this country, you will also for everything till you die. You cannot buy a house unless you start from Mowe or you go inside the Badon. And what that does is that it brings up the mindset of, oh, how do I make more money so that I can take advantage of? Mr. Christopher, like you said, it is difficult. It's going to be difficult for us to actually trickle down to say that, oh, it's actually these small businesses that are actually taking value of these things. Trust me, no matter how comprehensive your policies are, no matter how comprehensive your tax laws are, some people will always game that system. They will always maneuver that system, no matter how comprehensive it is. The right thing to do, first thing first, is even to have a database of every individual, every business in this country, linking from CAC portal that shows activation to your bank accounts, to the BVN link to that bank account, to the NIN number of the directors that have their BVN link to that account, such that if I call for the record of a company, right? If I work at the FIRS or LIRS, I can call for your record and it will be in sync with CAC, it will be in sync with JTB, it will be in sync with FIRS. I would also see other things you've done with Federal Ministry of Interior. I would also see things you've done with other authorities. But as we speak, a lot of those authorities are in Discord. It is difficult for you to request for a document from this person and then get it in your own office because everyone is not aligning on the same goal. Everyone is just, oh, my own budget, my own revenue, my own revenue. We cannot grow an economy like that until everyone now seeks to work hand in hand. I look forward to a situation where even if I review your records and I say that, you actually made 25 million, but you are not a limited liability company, and I work with the FIRS, I should actually be able to actually send your record to the LRS to actually confirm, or to the state where you're coming from. This individual, he has this BVN, he has this. Has he paid tax? Is he paying taxes? If not, can a PND be posted on his bank account so that he's not able to withdraw until he does tax compliance? We just do a lot of things in this country as if it's a jungle. We don't have scenarios where tax, evaders go to jail. Nobody takes it serious because even the policy makers that are making some of these policies are also not complying. So they won't even allow that person go to jail because eventually it will get to their turn. So until we start taking serious measures against non-compliance, we will never get there as a country. Never. All of these businesses, right now you have situations where a lot of businesses are drifting towards having money point POS machine. And money point is asking that, they should go do CAC regularization. They should make sure everything is linked and is working effectively. Is that not a good step? Yes, it is. Can we make a build up on that? For everyone that's actually linked the CAC portal recently, can the CAC provide the details to all relevant authorities? Have these people been subject to tax at different levels? Have they provide documentations to assess them? Are they actually eligible to tax or are they not eligible? All of those processes. But until we get to that level where all of the authorities are in sync, orientation of a Nigerian is actually changed, and the government actually gives back. We are the Caesar. Government is the Caesar in this country, but we are also a Caesar. You need to give the citizens what belongs to them. The good life, the light, the electricity, the road. Just give me a good environment. I want to travel to Abuja by road without keeping 10 million for ransom. I want to go for a business. I want to expand my outlet. I have an outlet in Lagos. I want to expand in Maiduguri. I want to do in Borno. I shouldn't have to think of insecurity. I shouldn't have to. It's complex. Nigeria's problem is so complex that it cannot be deciphered even if you sit down on a 20 days phone call or a Teams meeting. It is what it is. Until we put in some of those measures, we are where we are. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Yemi, for the amazing insights you've shared on this month's edition of the Finance Business Partners Meet and Chat. It's been a value-packed session. I've gained a lot and my notebook is filled at the moment, but we would hope that at the end of the day, the country would progress and the government would do what is right, as well as the followers, just as you rightly mentioned earlier in the course of your presentation. So with this, we call it a wrap on this month's edition of the Finance Business Partners Meet and Chat. We expect that everyone will join us next month when we have another person talk to us on a trending topic. So Mr. Yemi, we are glad that you joined us on this edition, and we are hoping that when we call on you again in subsequent months that you would respond to our call and come speak to us. We appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Only that I'll start sending invoices. I've learned that we are now in a T-paying regime. So we need to bill for everything that we do.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you everyone for joining this session. We believe that you've gotten value for your time and we expect that you would join us in our subsequent editions. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for having me. Do enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.